Welcome everybody that has jumped on from the USMCA webinar. Thank you. Yes, I am still the same moderator that you saw a couple of minutes ago. I was so good they asked me to do it again, and we're going to do it with one that I feel more comfortable with because I've met some of these people in some of the times that I've moderated this in years past. For those of you who didn't join us, let me introduce myself. My name is Solomon Maya. I'm the creative director at Energy Communications, the representative for Televisa Californias, a Spanish language television station here in the Baja California and San Diego region. I am ecstatic to talk about basically, apart from what's happening in today's region, one of the things that keeps people up at night are the dollars and cents that are in their bank account and how they're going to make next month's rent or pay next month's car bill. Something different than what we've experienced in years past, obviously, because we're not even at the convention center. We're here with you virtually, and I thank you all for joining us. So I'm not going to take up much more of your time. I do believe that the order was, is it okay if I just go via the order panelists to introduce you guys, or is anyone going first due to the PowerPoint?
I think for content reasons that I should go first, followed by Gary, and then Gary will bring up the discussion or finish it up.
Oh, perfect. Well, without much ado, let's go ahead and introduce Ray Major. He is the Chief Economist and Chief Data and Analytics Officer for Sandag. Mr. Major leads the Office of Data Science and Analytics and is responsible for agency-wide utilization of empirical information as a regional asset. Mr. Major has over 20 years of private sector experience and is currently serving as a San Diego County East County Economic Development Council board member. Mr. Major holds multiple degrees in economics from San Diego State University. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Ephraim, can you bring up the first slide, please? And let's go to the next one. Next slide, please. What I wanted to start out by talking about is what the impact of this COVID-19 crisis has been on the San Diego region in the first 6 months. And these are some of the sobering numbers that we've put together. In terms of job loss, there have been over 450,000 people who lost their jobs at some point during this crisis. We still have 176,000 people who are unemployed because of COVID. In terms of lost wages, those people who are unemployed have lost somewhere between $4.5 and $5.5 billion in wages. Although some of that may have been made up by federal stimulus, this is a real number that impacts the citizens of San Diego. When we look at our gross regional product, we tried to estimate how much this is going to impact our economy. We're looking at about a $10 to $15 billion hit in terms of GRP. In 2020, which means that our economy will have shrunk by about 4.7%, and taxable retail sales will fall somewhere between $5 and $7 billion, which is about 8.3% down. These are hugely sobering numbers. Next slide, please. So who got hit the worst in this crisis so far? 80% of the job losses happened in 3 industries: tourism, retail, and education. The industry that was hit the hardest, and it's truly devastating what happened in the tourism industry, where we lost about 78,000 jobs. People are still unemployed in that particular industry. About 36,000 people who worked in retail are still without jobs, 28,000 in education. So when you take a look at that, those 3 industries, 141,000 unemployed. The only thing that these industries have in common is that they're all high touch. And by that, I mean that you have to be within 6 feet of your customer to do the work that you do. And that's why they have such high job loss, because we shut down because of the coronavirus. And you can see that there's job loss in all of the sectors, but not as much as in these 3. Next slide, please. We also monitored the level of economic activity that occurred during the stay-at-home orders now for the last 6 months. And I just wanted to share some statistics with you. During the first part of the COVID crisis, when we locked down in early March or mid-March and then going into April, businesses were down somewhere between 30 and 80%. And this shows you it happened in lots of different sectors. And as the economy started to reopen in the midsummer, but kind of around the 4th of July time period, businesses were down in general about 25 to 45%. And then you can see that even today, 6 months later, businesses are down somewhere between 30 and 50%. I highlighted a couple of interesting industries. I just wanted to point them out. The yellow line represents home center and hardware stores, home improvement. So it's like Home Depot and Lowe's. A lot of people took on summer projects, and you see that the activity there was much higher during the summer months. But take a look at sit-down restaurants, and you've heard about the problem that we've been facing in the restaurant industry. It has been down for 6 months, and it's still down by over a third. Department stores, which is retail, you can see also it's down by nearly a third. And auto and repair and maintenance is interesting because as people drove less, they didn't need to fix their cars, but then all of a sudden people started driving again. And you see that auto repairs, if they were deferred maintenance or whatever, needed to get done, and you see that industry has actually increased. Next slide, please. My last slide just kind of talks about what our forecast looks like. Before COVID, we were forecasting that the economy would grow by about 2% in 2020 and about 2% in 2021. So just kind of steady growth, a little less than we had seen in the couple years prior. However, what happened was that we had COVID. Now, this graph shows the 9 national economic firms like Oxford Economics and the Office of Budget. And so these are big econometric firms. We've done the averages to try to figure out what the consensus forecast is. In early June, we were forecasting the economy for 2020 would be down by a 7.8%, and then it would rebound in 2021 by 4.1%. But the newest numbers that have come out are not as dire as they were in June. We see the economy contracting about 4.7% this year and then rebounding by about 4.2% next year. The reason for that is probably because of all the federal stimulus money that has been pumped into the region. And so what that did was to keep us from going into as deep of a recession as we could have. But you'll also notice that that blue line, or the dark blue line, doesn't get us back to the yellow line. Our forecast shows that it's going to be somewhere between 3 and 5 years before our economy can recover from this recession. And with that, I'll hand it over to the next speaker.
Hi, this is Carrie Kapich. And I'm going to ask if you can pull up the Tourism Authority update. And I want to thank Ray for kind of setting the stage for what is the hardest hit industry as it relates to this crisis. Next slide, please. So my role at the Tourism Authority is Chief Operating Officer. I oversee the marketing, the research, and community outreach. And unfortunately, Ray and I have been on a lot of these calls lately talking about the devastation and the impact that we've had hit our industry and our entire community. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea of what's at stake, it's really our regional economy. Prior to COVID, we had 35 million visitors a year come into San Diego, and they generated over 19 billion in total economic impact. And we had about almost 200,000 San Diegans who were employed in our industry. Next slide. When we take a look at visitation for San Diego and what's happening, obviously when the pandemic hit, we saw huge drop-offs in terms of visitors coming into San Diego. Even though our hotels were open for essential workers, obviously they were not open for leisure nor for meetings or conventions. People stopped traveling in to stay with household members. They were not coming in to stay at campgrounds or visit into Airbnb, and no day visitors coming in, which is really important because we've always had a great deal of traffic coming over from Mexico into San Diego for tourism purposes. Next slide, please. When we take a look at points of entry, we work with Caltrans to track who's coming in. And obviously, as you can see, all areas coming into San Diego have been badly impacted, including our airport, which is down 70% in terms of traffic versus prior to the pandemic. Next slide. So when you take a look at what's been happening, even though there's been some new air service that has come through, air travel has been really shut down, and we unfortunately are in danger of losing our international air service out of the United Kingdom and Germany. Next slide. One thing that's important for people to understand, a lot of times there's a perception that visitor spending and travel and tourism only benefits hotels, and that is not the case. 70% of visitor spending is spent outside of hotels. It's spent in our restaurants, at our shopping centers, it's at our major attractions, it's spent at our airport and through other expenses like catering for major events and conventions and transportation. So this has a ripple effect throughout our entire community. It impacts everyone throughout our community, large and small, in terms of business and business operations. There's over 12,000 businesses that make up the tourism sector. Most of them are small businesses. And obviously you continue to hear of the challenges that our small business owners are facing as they're trying to struggle through how to work through this pandemic and the ability to stay open or not. Next slide. So we lost $4 billion in visitor spending from March through July. And although we're starting to see some increase and some change in terms of visitation into our community now that we are open for leisure travel, we still have a great deal of decline that is happening and will continue to happen for quite some time to come. Next slide. Taking a look at hotels. Hotels have been open for essential travel and hotels have been open for leisure visitors. So that has been a one area that we've been able to do fairly well with for San Diego in terms of demand for leisure travel. And we're starting to see a little bit of growth in terms of rates. But I will tell you that leisure travel and hotel occupancy throughout San Diego County is still down 30% year over year. And average daily rates in San Diego are down nearly 40%. And obviously that is a huge impact in terms of not only the businesses that are being run, but also to tax revenues that are generated through the transient occupancy tax that many cities count on for essential services. Next slide. We are performing, when we take a look at the county and we take a look at all of the different areas of San Diego, I think Paola was talking about this earlier in regards to our South and East County areas and how attractive that is from a hotel stay perspective to stay on this side of the border and to be able to do business and work here on this side of the border. And you've seen that that area has continued to outperform other areas in terms of hotel occupancy. So while there may not be as many rooms within those markets, you're looking at a 72% occupancy on average for the last week we have reporting, which was September 13th through 19th. Next slide. Hotel visitors into South County areas are delivering over $7 million in hotel taxes prior to the pandemic. So the challenge obviously becomes, how does the city of Chula Vista, National City, Imperial Beach, and other areas deal with the loss of that hotel tax revenue into their general funds? Next slide. The tricky part on all of this is, as bad as it is here in San Diego, we're actually doing a little bit better than some other markets because we do have strong leisure business. We live in an area that attracts visitors from California and Arizona. You're talking a large population base. And because we have beautiful outdoor recreation and we have some of our theme parks, including the zoo and now SeaWorld, partially opened, we are, of course, able to have some visitation into the market and reasons for people to stay with us. In addition to San Diegans who are choosing to stay in San Diego versus leaving San Diego for their vacation. Next slide. We've Worked with Tourism Economics to do a forecast going forward. What does travel and tourism look like during the COVID crisis? Next slide. And when we take a look at what we see in terms of demand for hotels, demand for overnight stays, and for rates, we're seeing continued declines into 2020 and 2021. Next slide. The forecast for hotel room night demand throughout San Diego is that without group meetings and conventions, we'll continue to see a decrease in year-over-year performance as we go forward. And really, we are very concerned about the industry's ability to hold on and maintain, whether it be a hotel or a restaurant or a theme park or anyone else who is dependent upon it. Could even be CPAs who do business with the tourism and hospitality industry. The decline has been so severe, and without any indication of being able to move forward for additional activities within our county and within our state, we are definitely in for a long recovery. When we take a look at what's happening in other areas, Las Vegas has just announced that they will start doing group gatherings up to 1,000 people. We have youth tournaments here in San Diego, sports tournaments like lacrosse and soccer, who are starting to move their events out of California and into Colorado and Utah. So next slide. Unfortunately, we have a long recovery ahead. So it's a great challenge. We appreciate being included in this conversation. And I should note that our community has done such a good job of re-engineering and rethinking and redoing how they operate, and they are operating safely. So we look forward to support from the broader business community and from stakeholders to continue to encourage the state to let our businesses reopen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Kevich. And we'll just keep on rolling for more information. Mr. London, go ahead.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here again this year. I, like the rest of you, would have rather been at the convention center. And I think that's sort of a good start here. I mean, what we missed the most out of, coming out of, well, we're in the midst of COVID is, the little things, the coffee shops and the restaurants and the hugs and the handshakes and all that. And, someday we'll get back to that. And I found Carrie's presentation particularly sobering. And frankly, I think you're spot on. I agree that this is going to be a long slog back for our economy. And the early expectations on the part of some pundits that this would be sort of a V-shaped recovery, that we would come right back, was never right. It's obviously more wrong today as we wake up this morning with the realization that our president has it. It's going to be a long time for us to really be able to declare victory. And so far, we basically have failed. I mean, essentially, I'm a father of 3 boys in grade school, and I feel like we wasted the first 3 months of the pandemic last spring in our online classes, because here we are again without any real expectation that the kids are going to go back to school in the foreseeable future. What I've been saying to people is the point that you can measure the beginning of the recovery is the point where we get inoculated, where there's a vaccine. And I since sort of have thought that perhaps that's not even right, because now we're going to have a inoculation battle when the vaccine finally comes out, and clearly we're going to be wearing masks for the next year. Now, I'm a real estate guy. I'm a real estate economist, and I'm going to sort of focus on that mostly. But I do want to distinguish the fact that in real estate, we play long ball. And a lot of what we're talking about today is short ball, which is to say that a lot of the impact of COVID is not necessarily impacting the real estate sector, at least not evenly across the board. And I'll speak to that in a moment. But essentially what we have here in the San Diego region and the rest of the nation is sort of what I'll label as a bipolar economy. The people that are in the businesses that are touching other people, the Main Street businesses, the restaurants that Carrie was speaking to, the hotels, the businesses where people have to walk into are much more significantly impacted than are sort of the other sector of the economy, which San Diego is all in on, which is to say professional services, high technology, biotechnologies, and so forth, which represent a very considerable part of our economy. Essentially, that part of our economy has been minimally impacted, both with respect to the sickness and with respect to our ability to, to conduct our business. I mean, I'm speaking to you in what I call my tree house, which is my house behind the house. And I've been working here. I really haven't had to change my lifestyle. I don't go to the office that much anyway. My guys are in the office, and they've masked up for the last few months, but they choose to be there. But the point is that we're all being productive in that sector, whereas the other sector, it can't be productive. And that's where the real damage is being done, obviously, as you heard in the hotel and in the retail sectors and the tourism sectors in general. And it does impact South County in a bigger way than the rest of the region, primarily because a lot of the residents of South County are in these sectors and manufacturing also. And it tends to impact Hispanic population greater and people of more moderate means greater than that sort of other economy. So I sort of wanted to clarify that as a way of a long introduction to what's going on. I also wanted to speak to the fact that as we see this huge compression in our economy take place, it does have a fiscal impact, and it will impact the budgets of the various municipalities in our region. And that will play out in terms of their ability to provide municipal services. And there's going to be cutbacks, and there's going to be pain in that regard. The good news with respect to South County is you've got a lot of action going on there. As I spoke to last year, and I sort of can edify this year, I mean, there's a big, huge horizontal building going on at the border with the new Amazon center down there, a bigger building than you can even imagine. Think Empire State Building horizontal. It's just huge, and there will be a lot of employees there. And we have now the opening of the beginning of the opening of the RITA project at the port. First with the RV project, and then more is coming there. And eventually, as the business and tourism in general, the convention center business starts to build up again in a few years, that you will be the recipient of the opportunity there. So there are bright spots there. The negatives, obviously, are the problems along the border, just crossing the border. A lot of the people that work in the hotel sector live in Tijuana. That's a problem. And with the current policies in effect on the federal level, that's going to continue. That's going to continue to be a problem as well. Again, with respect to real estate, we think long term. So in terms of development, well, my clients who are developers are going full speed ahead, because it takes a long time from beginning to shovel in the ground to do projects. And so you just don't stop because there's a curve in the economy. And so a lot of the projects that we've been working on will continue to play out. And some of them are big public regional projects. Obviously, Ray knows this better than I, but the Sandag Navy transportation hub that we've all been working on just to the north edge of downtown is a big deal. There's a little bit of story out in the newspaper this morning that the environmental review process is going ahead. That's a huge employment addition prospectively, and sort of solidifies the Navy's role and the technology role in our economy. That's a big deal. And the announcement that the Manchester Gateway project is being sold to Big Biotech REIT, which means that perhaps downtown commercial office development will really take a positive upturn over the next few years, with the potential that there's going to be biotech downtown, a biotech cluster downtown. And that 1.5 million square feet of office space, coupled with the Horton Plaza redo, which is another 900,000 feet, coupled with the Padres announcement that they won the Tailgate Park site, which could add another 1.5 million square feet of office project. I worked on that one. So, we've got a lot of ambitions there. We could be adding 3 to 4 million square feet of office space downtown, which is really interesting because downtown hasn't seen office space net increase in 2 decades, not since the late 1990s. And now we're talking about basically the rejuvenation of the expansion of office market the size of Carmel Valley, almost the size of UTC. So there's going to be a lot of action there at a time when the one thing you can be sure of in the office sector is that no matter what your sense of how things are going to be when people sort of go back to work in offices, there's going to be a compression of demand for office space, at least on an employee per square foot level. We don't know whether that compression is going to be 10% or 30%, but between less need for it, this great experiment that we're doing where we can work at home or partly work at home, some kind of hybrid or flexibility model, all this is going to translate into an overall compression of the expansion of demand for office space. And we'll see how that sort of plays out regionally. With respect to the retail sector, obviously it's been tremendously hard hit. Even before COVID, much of the work in our shop in terms of market studies and feasibility studies and strategic recommendations to our developer clients has been oriented towards how do we redo shopping centers? These shopping centers who sort of are a vestigial remainder of the last century that we don't need anymore. What are we going to do with those? So there's big projects on regional sized footprints and neighborhood shopping centers where we're sort of reconceptualizing those to mostly residentially dominant projects, and you're going to see your share of that down in South County as well. So there's compressions in those sectors. In contrast, the residential sector has been doing pretty well. Partly is because in San Diego, there's way more demand than there is supply, and that's perpetually the case because we don't like development in this region, and so we do everything we can to prevent development, to elongate the time of entitlement. In the county of San Diego, they're sitting on 10,000 approved units that's going to sit, no shovel in the ground there, because now we have to redo a climate action policy on the part of the county. So there's a few more years where projects can't be developed in a county. And this is a county that's reluctant to allow new development in the unincorporated areas in the first place, which is a problem because that's where all the dirt is, that's where all the land is. So the emphasis has been on infill building up vertically rather than out horizontally in the suburbs, which is an irony because most of the demand is for, right now at least, is from young families who want to live sort of in the suburbs. We know that from studies, and we know that San Diego by definition is mostly a suburban region. And what we're telling people is that that has to be redefined in some way. And so we're going through that change as well in the residential sector. So just to sort of wind up, things are going to take a few years to sort out. There's not going to be an instant recovery here. I feel bad that we didn't get our arms around this nationally when we had the opportunity. We were talking about this last January. All of us knew that there was a potential for a pandemic, but interestingly, and I'll end on this, Solomon, interestingly, most of the economic pundits at the end of last year and the beginning of this year predicted that 2020 would be a rerun of 2019. All systems go ahead. And I don't know where you were in that race. I'm not pointing my finger at you. But I will say that, that when there's economic change, it happens because of outliers, usually things that we can't predict. But we can sort of look out there and say what's out there. And we knew that there was a virus out there. We had never experienced a pandemic at this level, and we did nothing about it. And so here we are. So the best I can do is say that this is a long slog back. We're still in the midst of the battle. There's no real opportunity that we're going to see any instant recovery. And it's just important that people maintain their positive attitude, that I'm telling my clients to be flexible, to look for other business opportunities, and just don't believe economists, because he who lives by the crystal ball eats broken glass.
Thank you, Gary, for that. And we actually have about 5 minutes, so I'm going to ask just one or two questions. If we could keep them to a couple of minutes, I'll go back to Ray, because obviously we're thinking South County, we're thinking locally. So what is the impact that we're going to see on the planned investments in infrastructure projects such as the Otay 2 border crossing, the expansion of MTS, or especially the big one, the development of the Bayfront project?
You know, this goes back to something that Gary was talking about, and that's that these infrastructure projects that we're working on are measured in decades, not necessarily in months like we're experiencing here, you know, with this economic turndown from COVID. All of the projects that we're currently working on that have been funded are continuing. We are working on the third border crossing. I met with the team just this week to discuss moving that project forward. So the big infrastructure projects are all going to continue to go forward. You know, in terms of revenue loss because of this COVID crisis, what we may see is that some projects may take a little bit longer to build, but those would really be the ones that are further out, maybe 10, 15, 20 years out in the projections, because the ones that are in the pipeline now are, for the most part, already funded.
Thank you. And so about 3 minutes, definitely want to get one question to each, but I do want to address the question that was thrown out in the chat by Flora Barron, and she asked to any one of the panelists, at what point will the lack of housing supply catch up with us, force a mass exodus of people who simply can't afford to live here? Anyone want to answer that, Gary?
Well, I mean, I think that's been, you know, San Diego has been relatively unaffordable for a long time. But when you look at the people that do come in and expand in our region, they're oftentimes people that come from less affordable places like the Bay Area and Los Angeles and Orange County. And we're historically the most affordable coastal community, at least on the West Coast. And so, but you know, I think Ray knows the demographics better than I, but we basically have had a net loss of people if you take out international immigration. And those are people that are looking for opportunities elsewhere. And what this great experiment that we're going through right now with this, you know, with at-home work and so forth, it does theoretically allow the people to work from anywhere so that they can move to, you know, to less expensive places in Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, and so forth. But I honestly don't expect a lot of movement based on affordability. But one thing is very clear, that you know, a little over 60% of our homes that are occupied are homeowners that are occupying them, not renters. That's going to change. We're going to have a lot bigger rental population and homeowner population. That's strictly owed to the unaffordability issue. And the unaffordability issue is almost strictly owed to the supply-demand imbalance that I was talking about earlier.
Thank you. And we're going to leave one last question. We have about a minute, Carrie. In everything that's happening in this year, you know, we all know how important tourism is to San Diego. Can you give us, let's go positive. Let's end on that positive note. What are some creative reimaginations of business models that you have seen from the business industry so far? Oh, you have to unmute yourself, Carrie.
Thanks. I've seen such creativity. You see things like the restaurant community moving to streets and doing both outside and some indoor. So I think that's been very creative in how they've reimagined that experience. I've seen the zoo and SeaWorld really rethink their product and their experience. Big focus on education versus maybe shows, for example. And the hotel community is doing a really great job in terms of work remote, school remote, and relax. So throughout, everybody has been very entrepreneurial. And at the end of the day, unfortunately, that is what we have to all do. And finally, just support each other. That's really important. San Diego is a very collaborative community. So learning from each other and supporting each other through this with new ideas and different ideas and advocacy for one another is key.
Thank you very much. And I can't one up that was exactly, we're all in this together. I want to thank Ray, Gary, Carrie for joining us. I want to thank you all at home for listening, and we're San Diego, we're strong, and we're going to make this through together, and I can't see nothing but good things ahead for us as a city, a county, and an entire people. So thank you to everybody. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you at home, and go ahead, go on to the next panel. Thank you.
The San Diego Foundation is supporting our region through the San Diego COVID-19 Community Response Fund, helping local nonprofit organizations bridge economic, education, and digital gaps. Learn more at sdfoundation.org/COVID-19.